Hi, this is Mark at learnhowtogarden.com, and in this episode of the 10-Minute Gardener we're sitting in my front garden and we're going to talk about planting beans. Beans are probably one of the best things we can plant in our garden for a return. For most of us that would be runner beans. My mum, especially in the 10-Minute Garden, adores a little wigwam of runner beans. And I've got a selection of beans here which I'm going to sort of describe why we're going to grow each one and then go through very quickly planting them. They're best to start indoors. What I tend to use, and we've talked about these before, are root training cells because they are deeper than the average pot. They open out so you get no root disturbance whatsoever. They're reusable, which I really like. The other alternative is to use toilet roll holders. We talked about that in our broad bean tutorial, which you can either look up on YouTube or if you're on the Learn How to Garden site, the broad bean one, which are much earlier in the year. So we'll just run through one or two of these beans and explain, why we grow them or what we do. I suppose the first thing we should do is sort of show you what we're talking about. The classic bean that I grow, and I don't know whether we can focus in on this. Now, this is the French bean. It's a bean that causes a lot of confusion, really. On all the packets it's described as a climbing French bean or as a dwarf French bean. And it's the bean that you most commonly come across in your supermarkets, normally grown in a third world country, lots and lots of air miles that you don't want to be thinking about, lots of fertiliser used on this. We can eat them as sort of pods before the actual beans have swollen inside, and that's what we tend to call French beans. Once the beans have swollen but are still soft, they're called flageolet beans. So a flageolet is still a French bean, and once those beans have swollen and then become hard and you've taken them out of the pod, that's a haricot. So in fact, flageolets, haricots and French beans, all exactly the same plant, exactly the same bean. And I'm just going to run through quickly two or three of the varieties that I grow, have grown for years, and why I grow them. The first of our French beans that I grow goes by the intriguing name of Trail of Tears. It's a bean that about 1838 is the first notice that we've got of this, and it's a bean that the Cherokee Indians, when they were forced to march from their ancestral homes across America, took with them, and about 60% of the population of Cherokees died on that march, hence Trail of Tears. Beautiful shiny little black bean when you eat it as a haricot, very flavourful. Grows up a literally wigwam, which is quite ironic, isn't it? Or in a row, grows up its sticks. What you do to plant all French beans, take a single bean, basically pop it about a centimetre deep into the centre of these root trainers. Once it's in, you take a tiny bit of compost, literally cover it up to the top of the root trainer, and then we'll water that in. If you're watching this tutorial and you're thinking, why isn't he doing this in his potting shed? I'll explain why I'm not in the potting shed. We've got a young robin that's nesting in an upturned or sideways on pot in our potting shed. She's got 3 babies now. She had 3 eggs and we're allowing her to raise her chicks in peace. I mean, I'm quite happy to sit here on this gorgeous night. As you can probably hear, there's a lot of birds in my garden, and it's really quite nice. So as I say, take a bean about a centimetre in, cover with multi-purpose compost. This is general multi-purpose compost, buy it from any outlet. Water. They'll go onto our heated bench, not in a propagator, just to give them a tiny bit of protection to get them going. Don't be tempted to plant them out in May. They really don't like cold feet. Much better, beginning of June, and they'll be absolutely fine. They'll romp away. The second bean I'd like to talk about is this wonderful old Italian variety. This is called Barlata Ding de Foca. Now, my Italian's rubbish. I mean, absolutely rubbish. But these beans aren't. They are great. As you can see, speckled sort of like a bird's egg. Bigger than our Trail of Tears, wonderful as flageolets, brilliant dried in soups and casseroles or cassoulets in the autumn. And again, planted in exactly the same way. You take a bean about 1 centimetre deep and cover with compost. We're not going to put them in here. I tend to grow a tray of each. It's an old heirloom Italian variety, slightly starchier, so in those cassoulets or soups really does thicken it up. And you could grow this in your vegetable garden because when the pods grow, they're sort of striped white and red, almost as though it's on fire. You remember those sort of wonderful stripes you used to see on custom cars in the 1960s, or if you weren't in the 1960s, in pictures of custom cars in the 1960s. That's the sort of effect this has, so it can look really good as an accent at the back of your border, grown up as a sort of wigwam of either bamboos or you can grow it up hazel. As you can see, I tend to grow a lot of my own bamboo in my garden. It's dead easy and I resent paying for it, if I'm brutally honest. My third variety, another climbing French bean, is called Casa Violette. And as you can tell from the name, the pods are violet. Beans very pale, brown, again chosen purely for flavour. I know that I bang on about this in every one of our tutorials and every one of the episodes of the 10-Minute Garden. The flavour's all that matters. Each one of these has been grown by myself, by my grandparents over generations. And we stick to what we know and we try one new each year. And this is, again, we've grown this for a long time. Great, smaller bean, wonderful, as we've said in stews. The other thing you can do with these, if you take some of the chilies we're growing, we tend to make really spicy bean burgers. You know, they say you can get spicy bean burgers in some of these takeaways, but we're talking about spicy bean burgers. In fact, we make one called a habanero 7-pot spicy burger, which I still defy anybody to eat the entire burger. It's far too hot for me. My 21-year-old has got 3/4 of the way through it, but he does tend to have, like most 20-year-olds, you know, cast iron mouth when it comes to eating chili. So that's the third one. The next of our beans is very different. This is a dwarf French bean. Exactly the same type of bean, but it grows very small. It'll only grow about this high in the garden, and they are bright yellow. This is Mirador. My youngest son refers to this as squeaky bean, and that's because the favourite way we have for using this bean in the summer, we pick them when they're about 15 centimetres long. We literally put them into a pan with some very good quality olive oil and some garlic, literally saute them for about 4 or 5 minutes, add a tiny amount of stock, leave them for another 2 to 3 minutes and serve them. And they squeak when you eat them, hence squeaky beans. That's Mirador. That's the fourth of the beans, much smaller. If you've got limited space, if you're gardening on a patio, you can grow this in a container. You can even grow it on a balcony, and nothing tastes like fresh beans. They will taste so much better than any you've bought in a shop ever. The next bean that we grow is a Lima bean, known to a lot of us as a butter bean. This is called the Pope's bean. As you can see, a much, much bigger bean, speckled. Again, this one really does need some warmth to get it going. You really don't want to put this out in your garden until about June. Butter beans, again, brilliant in cassoulets. We tend to do this as the second bean in our mix for our bean burgers. Introduced from Peru in about 1840, like a lot of the things that we take as staples now have come from South America. Potatoes, you know, our tomatoes, and quite a lot of our beans. So this is a butter bean. A lot of you think, you know, we don't grow butter beans because they're quite unusual, but worth giving a go. Again, quite easy, exactly the same technique, although they're much bigger. They go into the actual cells about the same depth as the bean itself. A good rule of thumb is to actually plant most seeds about half the depth of the seed, but with beans you really want it about the same depth as the bean. Into the cells, onto the heat mat. Certainly within 7 days they'll be up. In the second episode of beans, which will be in about 28 days, we'll be showing you how to plant these out, having shown you how to construct wigwams. The last of our beans that we're growing today is called a Martok bean. It's a type of broad bean. It's been grown in the village of Martok from about the 12th century. Please excuse the noises in the background. My dogs have come to join us. Those of you who've watched the episodes before, occasionally they do join in. This was preserved in the garden of the Bishop of Bath and Wells, and it's a very non-starchy broad bean. So I tend to grow this slightly later in the year. We already have some of our broad beans. They're about 8 inches high in the garden. So this is the Martok broad bean. This one's from Pennard Plants in Somerset. So that's the Martok bean from Somerset. This is Delilah. This is the second of my English pointers after Pandora, was the black and white one. The reason there are 7 packets and we've only discussed 6 beans is because the Trail of Tears I bought twice. I bought from the Real Seed Company and from Pennard Plants, which just goes to show that when you're going through the catalogues at the end of the year, I do have a diary. I have a plant diary that says what I've grown, but some things just appeal so much that, you know, you buy them twice. So they'll all be put into the actual root trainers, popped on the bench, and what I would advise you to do now, even if you've got a small space, you can put a single bean into a little 3-inch pot. In fact, if you're using a 3-inch pot, I'd probably advise you to use 2 beans and start them off. They are great. They give you a brilliant return for the area they utilise. If you think about it, especially with the climbing ones, you're actually utilising a small square footage of ground, but you're going 6 or 8 feet in the air. So you're actually bound to get a higher return on that space.